From the Times and the Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Manveen Rana. As the vice presidents prepare to debate tonight, there's one thing that a deeply divided America can agree on. This is an unbelievably close race. And so, cue the deluge of polls.
The opinion polls are perhaps the only way for us to get any kind of insight into what the electorate is thinking. At the moment, we're led to believe that Kamala Harris is leading Donald Trump by 5 percentage points.
The latest Fox News polling shows Harris ahead by 2 points nationally, 50-48. Those numbers flip, though, when you look only at battleground states.
Arizona, Donald Trump up by 5 points. Georgia, we're characterizing it as no clear leader, but he's got 4 points ahead of Kamala Harris. And in the great state of North Carolina, it's Donald Trump by 3 points. Again, no clear leader. I should note that these results are a little bit more Republican-leaning than the averages are.
The polls don't always get it right, but they are probably the best answer we have for the only question that anyone cares about. Who is going to win?
My system is different from all of the models.
One man would beg to differ.
I've been shouting this for 40 years, and if people came to believe this, we could have a wholly different kind of campaign in America. We can get rid of these shallow, negative, soundbite-driven campaigns and instead campaign on substance and vision.
Professor Allan Lichtman has spent 40 years fine-tuning his method for predicting the US election, and so far he has a near-perfect track record. The only mistake he's made was calling the 2000 election for Al Gore instead of George Bush. With 5 weeks to go and another nail-bitingly close race, who is he betting on? The Story today, the historian who predicted nearly every winner calls the US election. Would you mind just starting by introducing yourself to our listeners?
I'm Allan J. Lichtman, Distinguished Professor of History at American University in Washington, D.C., author of Predicting the Next President, The Keys to the White House 2024, and you can check me out on my live show every Tuesday and Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern U.S. at Allan Lichtman YouTube.
Oh, I'm sure people will after this. How long have you been analysing American elections?
I first developed my system in 1981 in collaboration with the world's leading authority in earthquake prediction, Vladimir Kailas-Borak from Moscow. And we became the odd couple of political research using his methods of pattern recognition that they use to predict earthquakes to examine American elections, according to my insight that elections are primarily votes up or down on the strength and performance of the White House party. And that odd couple collaboration led to the development of the 13 keys to the White House and our simple decision rule that if 6 or more keys go against the White House party, they're predicted losers, otherwise they're predicted winners. And I made my first advanced prediction in April 1982, when I predicted Ronald Reagan's reelection nearly 3 years ahead of time during what was then the worst recession since the Great Depression, when 60% of Americans said he was too old to run again and his approval rating was historically low. So I have a 40-year track record. Makes me very old, but that's okay. A 40-year track record of successful prediction over 10 American presidential elections.
That's a very impressive track record. What made you want to try and predict which way an election would go?
You know, I didn't initially start out thinking about doing prediction. I'm an historian. I write about dead people. But I'm a different kind of historian. I'm what's called a quantitative historian. That is, I mathematically analyze patterns of past politics, things like voting behavior. And that kind of naturally led me into an interest of, can I use these skills as an historian and as a quantifier to quantify and analyze and make a model of past elections that could in fact predict future elections. And my aim was not just to replicate the polls of the pundits. You know, they're interesting, but they have no deep message about elections. My model, and as I envisioned it, was to provide a message to the American people and the people of the world. And my model gauges the strength and performance of the White House party. That's what the 13 keys are all about. And it has a big message. It's governing, not campaigning, that counts. So when Biden was still running, people would ask me, what does Biden have to say to win this election? And I would quote the old Zen saying, unasked the question, nothing. What Biden has to do is govern well. And the best thing he could do to help the Democrats win in 2024 is against all odds broker a ceasefire and hostage release in Gaza.
Well, that hasn't happened yet. But tell us your latest piece of work. You know, you've made this an art form, studying quantitatively the past in order to predict the future. What is your latest prediction for 2024? Who's going to win the election?
Yes. According to the keys, not what I think, the model indicates that we are going to have a new and path-breaking American president, that Kamala Harris will become the first woman president of the United States, at least cracking, if not shattering the glass ceiling, and she will become the first president of mixed African and Asian descent, kind of foreshadowing where America is going. We're rapidly becoming a majority-minority country. Old white guys like me are on the decline.
Well, it's very brave of you, well, to make that statement, but also at a time where pollsters are very reluctant to commit. I know you don't rely on the polls, but it's so close, almost too close to call. You are opting for one candidate. You think it'll be Kamala Harris. Just talk us through your methods. How are you doing this? You mentioned keys. It's not polls you look at. What are the factors that you consider?
Yes. Keep in mind, I have frequently made correct predictions in defiance of the polls. So my system is totally different. It looks at the strength and performance of the White House party. I have 13 factors. And if 5 or fewer go against the White House party, they predicted to win. If 6 or more go against the White House party, they're predicted to lose. So here's the keys that count against them. The mandate key. The mandate key is based on whether the White House party has won midterm elections for the U.S. House. The Democrats lost U.S. House seats in the midterms of 2022. Incumbency, whether the sitting president is running. It's now an open seat. Biden is no longer running. Incumbent charisma. The incumbent candidate is one of those once-in-a-generation, inspirational candidates who appeals broadly across the board to the American voters. Although Harris has made a good impression, she does not come up to the level of the once-in-a-generation, inspirational, transformational candidates like Franklin Roosevelt. That's 3. And then there's a 4th key, the foreign policy failure key. I count Gaza as a failure. It's a humanitarian disaster with no end in sight. And although we don't have boots on the ground, the U.S. is deeply involved in the Middle East. That's 4. That's 2 keys short of what would be needed to predict that Harris would lose and Donald Trump would go into the White House. Even if another key fell, if something totally unexpected happened, that would still be 1 key short of what would be needed to predict Harris's defeat. That's why the system predicts we will have America's first woman president.
Well, so that's the tally against her. Now, talk me through the factors that she ticks off successfully. Well, what is it that you think will make her the next president?
The keys that they won, of course, are the contest key, whether there's a serious contest for the nomination of the incumbent party, and I have specific numbers for that. I was thinking, and I was very critical of the Democrats for publicly trashing their sitting president. I'd never seen that before. And I thought they were heading for disaster, not only losing the incumbency key when Biden would be pushed out, but also having a big party brawl and costing them the contest key. But somehow they grew a spine and a brain, and they united behind Harris, and that salvaged the incumbent party contest key. Remember, everything is measured against the incumbent party.
Right.
So, for example, one of the things that hurt the Democrats in 2016 was the big party brawl between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. Didn't have that this time. So that's one of the things that counted in her favor. Her nomination also helped with two other keys. The third party key, whether there is a serious third party candidate polling at least 10% or more.
The naysayers told us that we were climbing a glass version of Mount Impossible. So the first thing I want to tell you is that we proved them wrong. We did it because beneath the radar of mainstream media organs, we inspired a massive independent political movement.
No longer did voters have to choose between two old white guys. I hate saying that, being an old white guy myself, but it's true. And that contributed, I believe, to the fizzling of the RFK Jr. campaign and saving the third party key to the incumbents.
I want everyone to know that I am not terminating my campaign. I am simply suspending it and not ending it.
The social unrest key. There has been no massive, sustained social unrest sufficient to call into question the stability of the society. The protests had been directed against Biden, but he's now in the background. And the protests have fizzled, salvaging the social unrest key. The Democrats also won the policy change key.
Today, I'm pleased to announce that after months of tough and thoughtful negotiations, I know we have a historic economic framework.
There have been major changes in national policy between the previous administration and the current administration seeking re-election because of the fundamental changes in policy from Trump to Biden.
It's a framework that will create millions of jobs, grow the economy, invest in our nation and our people.
They won the scandal key. There has been no serious corruption implicating the sitting president with at least some bipartisan recognition of wrongdoing. And the definition of the key is very clear. The scandal has to be corruption implicating the president himself, not his son, Hunter Biden, not back during the Jimmy Carter era, his reprobate brother, Billy Carter. It has to be the president himself. So those are keys that stand in favor of the Democrats, the incumbents.
So there are 13 keys, 13 of these factors that you consider to work out which way the election will go. You've got 4 against Kamala Harris. The fact that she's not the incumbent, that would have been Biden. She's lost on that score. Foreign policy isn't looking great. She doesn't have the charisma of a once-in-a-lifetime leader. I mean, those are some of the factors counting against her. In her favor, She didn't have to face a contest. It didn't get messy within the Democratic Party. It's holding together. The third party, RFK, has dropped out. There's not that much competition. There's been some policy changes. There's no social unrest or scandal. How about the economy? Is she benefiting on that score?
Yes, I have two economic keys, and they win them both. The first is the short-term economic key. And it's not based on polls or sentiment or, is Trump or Harris better able to deal with the economy. All that is fleeting. It constantly changes. My key is very quantitative and very specific, that there is no recession in the election year. And clearly, there is no recession, and we're not going to have a recession in the next few weeks. That's impossible. Then I have the long-term key, which is also very specific and very quantitative. And that key is real per capita growth during the incumbent term is at least equal to the average of the previous two terms. And those growth measures under Biden are actually double than the average of the previous two terms. So along with some of the other keys that I indicated were in her favor, both the short-term and long-term economic keys count in favor of the incumbent party.
Now, I know you don't really look at the polls. You're looking at sort of the underlying factors. And according to that, on a short-term and long-term basis, you think the economy works in Harris's favor. A lot of people, though, going into this election, thought the vibes were off with the economy. We keep hearing that that's something Donald Trump is doubling down on. His campaign wants him to talk about it every time he stands up, talk about the economy. Is it really such a boon for the Democrats?
Look, I get this every day. People saying, what about inflation? What about this? What about that? And, there's talking points for Harris. There's talking points for Trump. There are all kinds of ways of looking at the economy. You could look at inflation and say it's weak. You could look at employment and the stock market and say it's strong. And my answer is, if you want to develop your own system, go right ahead based on any of those fleeting indicators. But that's not my system. And the short-term and long-term economy keys are not things I just conjured up. They are based on what works to predict elections from 1860, when I went back developmentally to set up the keys, during the horse and buggy days of politics, right up to 2020. So these two keys are time-tested to be accurate over 160 years of American politics. You can't change them in response to talking points on either side. And by the way, no one has ever been able to develop an effective predictive system based upon these fleeting voter sentiment polls about the economy.
You mentioned one of the factors that, again, is in favor of Kamala Harris is social unrest. How do you define that? Because
yes.
Certainly from here, it feels a bit like America's on the brink.
Yes, very good question. And this key is very specifically defined. It can't be sporadic social unrest like we've seen this year. It has to be, and these are the criteria, massive, sustained social unrest sufficient to call into question the stability of our society, like we saw in the late 1960s or early 1970s, or during the Black Lives Matter movement, when millions upon millions of people were in the streets. We were reeked with violence. The nation was really, very much on the brink. Nothing close to that this year.
And finally, one of the other factors that you have working in favor of Kamala Harris is what you call challenger charisma. So basically her opponent doesn't have the charisma to be able to automatically win the election, I guess. I mean, just explain again how you define that, because a lot of people would say, say what you will about Donald Trump. He definitely has some form of charisma, doesn't he? I mean, he does have a lot of very loyal supporters.
Exactly so. That's one of the more controversial keys, but I think actually one of the clearest. Yes, every day someone says to me, how can you say Trump does not fit the charisma key? He's a great showman. And my answer is I agree with that. But you've got to follow the definition of the key. which is a once in a generation, transformational, across the board candidate who's broadly appealing, like Franklin Roosevelt on the Democratic side or Ronald Reagan on the Republican side. Trump clearly does not fit the criteria because he appeals only to a fervent but narrow base. In 4 years as president, his average approval rating was 41%. The base, right at the bottom of all historical presidents. In 2 elections, he lost the popular vote, vote of the people, by a combined 10 million votes. FDR and Reagan won 6 elections by landslide. So it doesn't matter what you may think of Trump. Doesn't matter how fervent his base may be. He doesn't fit the criteria of the key, and it's clear. All the keys are measured against the strength and performance of the White House party with the simple rule that if they lose 5 or fewer of the 13, they are predicted winners. And because the keys are developed that way, they have a big message. Unlike all of the models, the pollsters, the pundits, and the message is it's governing, not campaigning, that counts. I've been shouting this for 40 years. And if people came to believe this, we could have a wholly different kind of campaign in America. We can get rid of these shallow, negative, soundbite-driven campaigns and instead campaign on substance and vision. For the winning candidate, that would create a mandate, helping them to govern, helping their party to win the next election. And for the losing candidate, at least they would have made their mark on the country, something significant that we remember. Whoever remembers anything a conventional candidate said, whether it be Hillary Clinton, Mitt Romney, John McCain, John Kerry, Bob Dole, doesn't matter. Their campaigns just become footnotes to history.
And Professor, it's really interesting because out of those measures, only charisma and scandal really talk directly to the character of the person running. Does that mean in this election, if it hadn't been Kamala Harris, if it had been, I don't know, Bernie Sanders, he would have stood just as good a chance?
Well, I never like to speculate on hypotheticals because the choice of a candidate can affect some keys. Like I said, I think Kamala Harris has positively affected the social unrest and the third-party key. But other things being equal, yes, it would not change the prediction. But again, I don't want to talk about hypotheticals because one change can affect other keys.
And I know you don't use day-to-day events as part of your way of judging. You're much more about the underlying factors. But this contest so far has been, the equivalent of about 30 news cycles all crunched into one. It's, gone at an astonishing pace. We've had 2 assassination attempts. We've had one candidate dropping out in favour of another. Does none of that have any effect? Particularly the assassination attempts, do they have no effect on the final result?
None whatsoever. My favorite comedian is the late, great Gilda Radner, and her character, Rosanna Dana, was famous for saying, there's always something. Every 4 years, people tell me, oh my God, this election is unique. You've got to change your key. We have an African-American running. Country's not ready to elect an African-American. We have the extraordinary situation of a candidate on tape bragging about sexually assaulting women. Got to change your keys. And that's the whole point. I don't, because the keys are the big picture of governance, and they are not affected by the ephemeral events of the campaign. The biggest myth of American politics is the so-called October surprise. I've always made my prediction before that, and I have never changed it, despite lots of pressure every year from people telling me there's something different about this election. Remember, developmentally, the keys go back to 1860, so they've endured vastly greater changes than anything we see in the course of any campaign.
And just finally, you've put this prediction out. It's a very brave thing to do. What has the response been to your prediction?
I've been doing this for 40 years. And so every 4 years, I make half the country really, really mad at me. And having done it for 40 years, probably the whole country is really, really mad at me. And every year I get, partisans on one side or the other, depending on my predictions, which are totally nonpartisan. I predicted the two most conservative presidents of our time, Reagan and Trump. I predicted liberals like Obama. So my predictions are totally nonpartisan. But every 4 years, partisans claim, oh, you're going to be wrong this year for whatever reasons, they might come up with. But this year, the partisan attacks have been particularly extensive and particularly vicious. But the truth is, I tell you who's going to win or lose. And so I can be proven right or wrong. I give you falsifiable predictions. And I'm 77, and I still get butterflies in my stomach every 4 years when I make a prediction.
Well, we'll check in with you when the election's over. I hope it's not too tense a watch. But thanks very much for talking us through your model.
My great pleasure. Enjoyed the interview. Take care.
That was Allan Lichtman, Distinguished Professor at American University and the author of the book Predicting the Next President, The Keys to the White House. This episode was produced by Taryn Siegel. The executive producer was Kate Ford. Sound design was by Tom Birchall, and theme tune was by Mal Lassetto. If you have any thoughts on what you've just heard, or if you want to get in touch with us about anything else, then do drop us a line to thestory@thetimes.com. Thanks for listening. See you tomorrow.